How you doing, everyone? I want to talk just briefly about Ayn Rand and this little snippet from the John Galt speech from Atlas Shrugged. And I mean, it's just a little bit, it's only like 3 or 4 minutes. And like in the book, the speech goes on for like 40 pages but in a nutshell, I think it sort of summarizes Ayn Rand's position of objectivism. And Ayn Rand, it's pretty fair to say she's one of the greatest modern defenders of a strong capitalism. And her philosophy essentially says um, that we should not sacrifice to the state, nor should we feel guilty about our riches if we've duly earned them through labor. And like on that level, I mean, I think a lot of people, um, I think a lot of ordinary people like Ayn Rand, but I think most scholars find her to be like trivial, and I think a lot of them would argue she's sort of debased, or like on some level, like people will cast her somehow as like demonic because of her defensive selfishness. But I think uh, she says interesting things that sort of have to be overcome and challenged if you're going to take a sort of different philosophy. So I'm just these are just the test questions. So uh, John Galt, he says, like, what is the one thing that still grows while everything else in society is sort of falling apart, and it's like the power of the rulers continues to grow. So these sort of rich elites have gamed the system in Atlas Shrugged, and everybody else is sort of they're poverty stricken and things are falling apart, right? That's the whole idea. um, Except for like a handful of elites. The leaders called for your sacrifice, and you thought it was what? Noble. And so there's a kind of interesting religious critique there of, I mean, sacrificing for others, right? That's the sort of Christian motif and there's a virtue in Christianity, and that's like philanthropia, like giving away, like not being so attached to your money. Um, and I guess the vice or the sin would be greed or avarice, right? Which is sort of interestingly related to another sin, which is envy, the kind of hierarchy looking up. But this whole idea of sort of seeing sacrifice as noble is something that Ayn Rand, she doesn't like appreciate that, particularly like when the state is asking for money. They said if you worked for yourself and your family, then you were what? Selfish and uncaring, right? So this idea that we've got to sort of sacrifice our own well-being for the greater good. But if we want to keep stuff that we worked hard for, then we're selfish and uncaring. She didn't like that, right? And I should say, she grew up, I think, during the Russian Revolution. Her father was a pretty wealthy store owner, but then the state came in and took everything and created a sort of flat communism. So she's really, she's defending capitalism from a kind of like a radical redistribution of income that flattens makes some people elites, but, you know, not the people who deserve to be. And Nietzsche has an interesting line where he says, socialism becomes appealing only when capitalism turns decadent. Something like that. I mean, if the people who have the money don't deserve the money because they've got it through like grift or ill-gotten means, or just kind of they've manipulated the tax laws, or whatever, um, then that's the kind of decadence of capitalism, right? And then socialism becomes very appealing. That's what Nietzsche says. So So they, being the kind of government officials, denounce the leaders of industry as greedy exploiters. And so you could think of these people like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates. And really, the list goes on and on of these sort of industry titans that changed the world in some way, acquired vast sums. I mean, like these are feudal sums of money. This brings back the days of feudalism. Like when like somebody could have literally like 1,000 or 10,000 times somebody else's wealth. It's I think Jeff Bezos is on his way to like $1 trillion, something like that. That's like 15 zeros. Um, and like, to what extent does that invoke a kind of morality that, enough is enough, right? We reach this point of saturation, or, is that money well earned? I mean, those are just like stock options. I mean, here's it. I mean, you and I, we didn't change the world by creating a corporation that sort of transformed uh, commerce. I mean, think of the power of Amazon. That's Jeff Bezos. Is he a greedy exploiter being a billionaire? I don't know. I mean, I think he's redistributing his wealth in interesting ways. All right. When they recognized the honor they deserved and rebelled against the guilt you wanted them to feel. And so this idea of sort of guilt and sacrifice, right? That, should we feel guilty for our money if we worked hard for it? I mean, like, and it's a religious concept, this sort of tension with sympathy and pity and philanthropy. Um, I mean, I think Hannah Arendt sort of creates a critique against these extreme forms of wealth because they really rip us away from the sufferings of the average person. And so, sympathy's different than empathy. Sympathy's different than empathy. Okay, here Hannah Arendt is invoking the kind of good versus evil, and she says all evil needs to win is the consent of good people, right? This sort of morality of sort of wealth versus sacrifice, right? I mean, is it selfish to want stuff and sort of be motivated by the carrot of wealth and stuff? To kind of labor, work hard, and then buy it. I mean, to everyone within the range of my voice, you have now a choice to make. If you decide to support the notion of sacrifice enforced by the state, your game is up. So again, this idea of the state forcing sacrifice on people through like taxation. Um, if you believe that your life is a sacred possession for you to make the most of, if you want to live by the judgment of your own mind, not edicts from the state, then follow our lead. Do not support your own oppressors. Stop letting the system exploit you. And so this, I mean, in a nutshell, I think is her idea of objectivism. It's called objectivism, and that's her philosophy. That and it's an extreme form of individualism. I think there's a very kind of strong, this notion of like our rights and our freedoms are tied to our expenditure, right? That money, in a way, is a primary medium through which we embody free individualism.